Missions are similar. You know, the private sector is trying to serve its clients and trying to achieve its objective and its goal. And the public sector is doing the same thing. We're trying to achieve our mission, understand where our objective is, and understand our goal. It's just a lot more difficult to get there. And the process is a lot slower. And I'm adapting to the slower process.
I always knew you as someone who liked to execute and execute very quickly and very well. So let's just start with at the 100,000-foot level. And that is your policy agenda. There are lots of questions about what are priorities, what do you want to achieve. You're close to the 100-day mark. Lots of expectations, but I think in some ways you're getting a bit of a bad rep. It's tough to get things done quickly, as you said. So tell me where we are at the 100-day mark and what's your agenda and what do you see for that the next few months holds for you?
So Tim, our agenda hasn't changed. When we came in day one, we talked about an agenda that revolved around jobs, job creation, employment, full employment, making the lives of citizens of this country better. Yeah. That's our #1 objective. How you do that, that's what we're working on. So we're going to do it in a bunch of different ways. #1, we're trying to improve healthcare in this country because we think that's a staple of quality of life. #2, we're trying to change taxes and tax reform. #3, you just had a panel talking about infrastructure. Right. The way we live our lives, the way we get to school, the way we get to and from work is really important. And we have a suboptimal infrastructure in this country. So those are our 3 cores that we're working on, but we do that in terms of how you live your life and how we create jobs. And on top of that, simultaneous to those, we're thinking about the regulatory environment. And the regulatory environment cuts across all that. I was listening to the panel, and one of the guests at the end in the last comment said, approval processes. Right. The approval process in the regulatory process and infrastructure is probably the most costly part of regulation. In slowing down the approvals, it just adds and adds and adds to the cost of infrastructure. We have to understand the cost of regulation and slowing things down. And so we are simultaneously looking at all of the different regulatory environments that we have, not just financial services. I know this crowd is very concerned about financial regulation, right, but we've got regulatory burden in almost everything we do, and we're spending a lot of time looking at the regulatory burdens as well.
We heard on our first panel this morning, we had a number of economists who said the deregulation piece is an important component. Maybe it gets overshadowed by the tax discussion or health care, but it's something you don't necessarily need Congress for. You can do that yourself. There's an executive order. You can get your cabinet secretaries and sub-cabinet once they're in place to really move quickly on the deregulatory piece.
A lot of it is personnel. A lot of it is interpretive personnel. Getting our personnel into position will help us on the regulatory, deregulatory agenda. The example I like to use is, we in the United States have a stress test for our banks. Europe has a stress test for their banks. The dialogue or the description of the stress test, it's different, but it's not that much different. The interpretation of the regulators that interpret the stress test is so different that a bank in Europe with 3% Tier 1 capital passes their stress test with flying colors. Right. Banks in the United States with 10% Tier 1 capital barely pass. Right. So, personnel is policy. And changing the personnel will change the policy, will change the interpretation, and we think that is very important. So you're right. Changing the personnel will have a big effect on a lot of the regulation that we have in the system. Even when you look at infrastructure, go back to infrastructure, you look at the EPA, you look at Bureau of Land Management, you look at Fish and Wildlife, you look at all these organizations and how they're just running approvals through their processes, how they look at the approval process, how they schedule hearings, just getting those things done and feeling a necessity. That's all personnel. And so we've instructed our people that we've got to get these things through the system. We're going to try and force a very quick deadline system into place so we make sure that we get things through the system as quickly as we can.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.